Miskawayh is called the third teacher after Aristotle as the first and Al-Farabi as the second. He is also considered as a teacher of ethics, partly because of his treatise entitled Tahdhibul Akhlaq, the refinement of character, used by the experts of Islamic education as a theory especially about ethics. Let's explore his contribution to Islamic philosophy. Ibnu Miskawayh's full name was Abu Ali al-Khazin Ahmad bin Muhammad bin Yaqub bin Miskawayh. He was born in Ray, Persia, Iran, around 932, during the heyday of the Abbasid dynasty. Ibn Miskawayh was a descendant of Persian whose family and he were said to be Magians, and then they converted to Islam. Several argue that Ibn Miskawayh was truly a Magian and then converted to Islam, but many scholars disagree with that opinion by proposing an argument that it was only his grandmother who was a Magian and then converted to Islam. This means that Ibn Miskawayh himself was born in an Islamic family as seen in his name, Muhammad. Only few know for sure about the Ibn Miskawayh's background of education, perhaps because he didn't write his autobiography and the chronicles didn't provide clear information about it. Ibn Miskawayh had good relations to the important people and rulers of his era. For decades he worked as a librarian for several viziers. He once got the trust of one of the ministers, Al-Mahlabi, and he was appointed a supervisor of the library. And then he also got the trust of Sultan ad-Dawla, so that he was appointed a treasurer. Although Ibn Miskawayh placed himself structurally in the government politics, he was an independent philosopher, meaning that he was not a part of any sect and not an instrument of the rulers at the time. It was there that he had the opportunity to take advantage of the palace library for nearly 7 years. So it was likely that he learned Greek philosophy from books that had been translated into Arabic. His career as a librarian had certainly given him many opportunities to be diligent in reading and writing so that he was able to produce his works. The problem of the soul has been prolonged discussion. Ibn Miskawayh was known as one of the Muslim philosophers who underscored the great importance of the knowledge of the soul. Because from here he then built his moral theory. Like other Muslim philosophers, he was also influenced by the thoughts of Greek philosophers. He argues that in the self of humans, there are two elements, the body and the soul. Between the two, there are different essences and substances. So strictly speaking, the soul is neither a body, nor a part of it, nor matter, but a single substance that cannot be touched by any of the 5 senses. Regarding this, he says that every matter takes on a certain form. This means that if the material has received a certain form at one time, then it can no longer accept another form except after separated from the first form. For example, said Ibn Miskawayh, if a material is receiving the triangular form, at the time it will not be able to accept the quadrilateral, circle, etc., except after it separates from the previous form. Unlike matter, the soul can receive all forms of things perfectly, both concrete and abstract. And the first form received by the soul will not disappear because of the coming of the second and so on. Therefore, human knowledge is always increasing. This means that when one receives new knowledge, the previous knowledge will abide. Thus it is clear that according to him, the soul has its own substance and essence separated from the body. Moreover, the position of the soul, in his view, is more noble than the body. This, according to him, is evidence because the will of the soul that has a tendency to something that is not bodily and wants to know the divine reality, or wants and prefers things that are nobler than physical things, and keeps away from physical pleasures in order to get the pleasures of the mind. As a consequence, the soul, according to him, is eternal. It will not be destroyed by the destruction of the body, and it is the soul that will receive retribution or reward in the afterlife. So it is the soul that will be happy or miserable over there. Ibn Miskawayh highlights that physical happiness is temporal, whereas the spiritual, tested by the soul, eternal. Then, in relation to intellect, he explains that the soul and the intellect are one. This means that the two, in his view, are not distinguished. In fact, intellect for him is precisely one of the forces that exist in the soul and a manifestation of the existence of the soul itself. Thus, it can be said that for him, intellect is one of the proofs of the existence of the soul. Ibn Miskawayh's studies on the soul and the body led him to a deeper discussion on the soul itself. In his opinion, the soul has three faculties. The division of the faculties of the soul underlying the theory of virtue is essentially Platonic. The soul possesses three faculties: the rational or angelic, lodged in the brain, the appetitive or bestial, lodged in the liver, and the passionate or leonine, lodged in the heart. Majid Fakhri explained that from this division it follows that the virtues, like their parallel vices, are divisible into three corresponding groups. Thus, when the rational part of the soul is moderate and yearns for genuine knowledge, which is its true object, its virtue, which is science or wisdom, would ensue. When the appetitive faculty seeks its own object in moderation and complies with the directions of reason, its virtue, which is temperance, and its concomitant, liberality, would ensue. Finally, when the passionate faculty is ruled by the rational self-control and its concomitant virtue, courage, would result. From the conjunction of these virtues will ultimately result the virtue of justice, which is the excellence or perfection of the other three, insofar as they are related to one another and are exercised in due proportion. That is why the principal virtues are deemed by the philosophers to consist in these four: wisdom, temperance, courage, and justice, and their corresponding vices are designated as ignorance, incontinence, cowardice, and injustice. Additional virtues can be included under those main ones. Under wisdom, these virtues are given intelligence, clearness of understanding, keenness, prudence, strong recollection, quickness of intellect, and teachability. Under the temperance are modesty, meekness, forbearance, liberality, integrity, contentedness, good nature, self-discipline, docility, peacefulness, dignity, and piety. Under the courage are magnanimity, valor, steadfastness, composure, single-mindedness, nobility, and adroitness. Finally, under justice are friendship, gregariousness, kindness to one's kin, gratitude, good companionship, fairness, affability, and worship. In relation to the soul, Ibn Miskawayh elaborated a moral theory in his famous work Tahdhibul Akhlaq, the refinement of character. Terminologically, he defines morality as a mental state encouraging every person to act without thought and consideration. The mental state by him is divided into two: those coming from instinct or character and those coming from habit and practice. Those coming from instinct, according to him, can be changed and directed by way of training and habituation. Because if not, according to him, religion would be meaningless to be revealed to humankind. It is clear that the main purpose of religion as information is to teach a number of noble moral values so that humans become good and happy by training themselves to live them. Thus, it can be said that between religion and morality there is harmony in which both function to improve the behavior of human actions. Then on the issue of the virtues and vice, Ibn Miskawayh argues that virtue is something can be achieved by human being by carrying out their will and by exercising with things related to human goals. In fact, more than that, he argues that what is useful for the achievement of these ends is good. In other words, the means and the end can be called good. On the contrary, the vice is something hindering human beings from achieving the good, both obstacles in the form of their will and efforts as well as their laziness and reluctance to seek the goodness. The virtue itself only exists in the object and is seen by humans with different eyes. This means that due to the differences in human perspective on the virtues become diverse. Regarding the realization of virtues, Ibn Miskawayh states that the morally correct path is the mean. He uses the Platonic substructure for not only his scheme of virtue and its corresponding vice, but also for the Aristotelian doctrine of the mean, and he exploits it for the purpose of determining the nature of virtue. Like Aristotle, he observes in this respect that virtue, as the mean between two extremes, cannot always be determined. Between two extremes, cowardice and foolhardiness, we should be encouraged. Actually, we must understand by the mean, not the mean in general, but the mean in relation to us. That is, in relation to the person, the actors, in particular context. According to him, the existence of happiness, which is a part of the virtue itself, can be tested by either human body or human soul. The viewpoints can be said to be the results of a compromise of the views of the previous Greek philosophers, especially those represented by Plato and Aristotle. Because happiness can be tested by human beings through these two facets, bodily and spiritual, according to Ibn Miskawayh, there are two levels of happiness. First, happiness for those who are very attached to material things and find happiness with them, but at the same time they long for spiritual things and try to get them by all means. And secondly, happiness for those who are deeply attached to spiritual things and find happiness with them, but at the same time they long for material things by seeing them as signs of God's power and proofs of His wisdom. Happiness at the first level, according to Ibn Miskawayh, is always accompanied by pain and misery, while happiness at the second level is more perfect and has more lasting pleasure. Spiritually, happiness can only be obtained if one has cut off contact with material things so that one no longer experiences pain and regret. If one manages to free herself or himself from this worldly and material bond, according to Ibn Miskawayh, then one will rise to the level of perfection, which according to his own terms is called the level of angels, the most perfect creatures of God. According to Ibn Miskawayh, happiness is the peak and perfection of virtues. In this context, the truly perfect happiness is only enjoyed by special and perfect people. In fact, this happiness is the one manifested by the mystical relationship between the free soul and the divine reality. This stage is clearly a higher level of happiness than that obtained only through intellectual perfection. In this respect, it seems that Ibn Miskawayh was also hugely influenced by Aristotle, where Aristotle asserted that the thing that makes humans the happiest is philosophy or contemplation of eternal and divine reality. The model of ethics developed by Ibn Miskawayh was eudaimonism, conceptualized by Aristotle, which is an ethical concept focusing on efforts to realize happiness. What about us? Have we gained our happiness? I'll see you next time.